The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a shoddy, badly drafted, badly constructed, undemocratic piece of law that degrades the privacy of New Zealand citizens, New Zealand businesses, and we will not and do not support it. Mr. Speaker, the Minister should be ashamed to have put this legislation before this House in this form. When Labor wins government next year, this law and its accompanying law, the GCSB bill, which is turned into law, will be gone. A comprehensive and independent review of our surveillance organisations, in particular the GCSB, followed by new security legislation with checks and balances, will be implemented, and new legislation which ensures the privacy of New Zealand citizens and businesses is protected, particularly in the digital environment. Mr. Speaker, twin pillars, that's what we require, twin pillars of legislation, twin pillars of democracy, both privacy and security. It's not an either or, it's both. And I'd like to refer to the third reading speech in the GCSB bill, in the speech by David Shearer, where he said, "We will act on day one in office to commission the full review that we have promised. We will seek agreement across this Parliament for terms of reference. We will replace this law," and that's the GCSB law, and today I am saying the TICS law. We will replace these laws with world-leading law that is based on the findings of that comprehensive inquiry, because the only way we will ever win back people's trust, which has been so sadly lost across this country, is to get an enduring solution that works in the best interests of this country. Mr. Speaker, that is the Labor Party's unequivocal position on this piece of shoddy legislation. This legislation provides enormous powers to the GCSB and to other agencies and to ministers, including the minister who just spoke before me. There has been no case made during the passage of this legislation for the enormous powers that it's providing to the GCSB and to ministers, enormous powers in the definitions, particularly in the definitions and in Part 3 of that bill, which have no appropriate checks and balances and no independent scrutiny accompanying them. The only independent remedy open to people who have disagreed with what is happening behind closed doors in private is to seek a judicial review. That is at the very end of a process, and the economic impact on networks as a result of this bill could be very serious. Mr. Speaker, that is why I have introduced a private member's bill which amends this bill, which in the interim before Labor wins government, which would create a technical advisory board to act as a buffer against the GCSB and a government minister exercising surveillance powers with no independent scrutiny or accountability. At least that would provide some measure of a checks and balances, which would go some way towards mitigating the effects of this bill. This bill enables the GCSB into our telecommunications networks to control the means through which we send and receive communication. It enables the GCSB to recommend to the minister to give a minister extraordinary and secret powers over a service provider over any one of these networks, such as Gmail, such as Facebook, such as websites and such as Skype. Services caught up in the definitions in this bill could include any website or interactive piece of software. Organisations that could get caught up include schools, universities and libraries. This may not be the government's intention, Mr. Speaker, but it is the result of badly drafted law, and it's the result of a minister who has refused to listen to submitters and refused to listen to the public that have questioned what the widespread implications are of this piece of legislation. And when the Minister said that nothing has changed in the definitions, well, Mr. Speaker, the technology has changed. The technology has changed, and that is where the problems arise in this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation will create a chilling effect on New Zealand business. The Minister has been warned over and over again and pleaded with by New Zealand businesses that this bill creates ambiguity around the definitions of what constitutes a network and provides powers that are too broad and without checks and balances to the GCSB, to individual ministers, including herself. Mr. Speaker, the costs, which haven't properly been debated in this House, of this legislation, potential costs of this legislation are enormous, and I want to refer to some of them today, because there was a set of supplementary submissions provided to the Select Committee which were not allowed to be taken into account during discussion in Select Committee. They were not allowed to be discussed, officials were not allowed to comment on them, and we were not allowed to seek any extra advice on the implications of those costs. I want to refer to what some of those costs are. For instance, Mr. Speaker, that 2 Degrees, which is one of the telecommunications company, produced a submission saying that the likely impact would be many millions of dollars from lost revenue, damage to brand and customer satisfaction, and lost sales opportunity. This was just one part of the law. Many millions of dollars that could be added, delaying restoring customer service, and major delays that could result and severely dent customer confidence and revenues, which they added in their submission could be fatal to the business. Chorus put in a supplementary submission on this piece of legislation that said that there was potential to impose significant costs on network operators. They said they could not provide exact costs without knowing what concerns the GCSB or the Minister may raise or want remedied, but there was potentially very wide scope and therefore considerable uncertainty as to the cost implications. Vodafone also gave submissions on the costs. They said that it could result in reduced level of competition from vendors, consultation introducing delay in network projects, and that these could be very significant. And finally, Enable Networks, which is rolling out ultra-fast broadband around the Christchurch and Canterbury region, the Minister's own region, gave more specific costs. They said that there could be $150,000 per annum just for operational changes to change their business. They said that there could be $400,000 per year as a result for their annual operating expenditure. And if there was a requirement for them to change a vendor within their business, then that could cost in excess of $50 million. $50 million, Mr. Speaker, that is extraordinary. Another thing that has to be mentioned is whether or not there is the capacity for the GCSB to undertake these new powers in their current state without a proper review taking place. Mr. Speaker, this is a very poor piece of legislation. the context in which it's being debated is ill thought out, rushed. It's in the context of widespread spying allegations across the world in which New Zealand should be paying attention. And there should have been a widespread public conversation about what was the justification for this law, where was the evidence that this law was needed to provide those powers, and what were the privacy implications for New Zealanders.
I call the honourable member